Hi, everyone, and welcome. I am so glad to be here today with the GMAT Club. My name is Judith Silverman Hodara, and I'm a founder and principal at Fortuna Admissions. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be with you here today. And what I wanted to spend some time talking about and sharing with you from my own experience was the Wharton team-based discussion. As you may or may not know from looking at my bio online and at the Fortuna website, I spent a really long time in MBA admissions. I most recently was at Wharton as acting director and senior associate. And before that, I spent about 15 years in the admissions field. So altogether, I have quite a number of years under my belt. And I'm really thrilled to be able to share with you today some tips, things to think about, and ways that you might want to consider approaching the team-based discussion at Wharton. So a little bit of history. Wharton introduced the team-based discussion just a few years ago. When I was at Wharton in my last year, we were really talking about how to kind of engage the student base a little bit differently. What was happening was I would go on interviewing trips all over the world, and I would spend a week in different countries, and then I would spend a week in the US in different cities. And what was happening was that students were incredibly scripted in their interaction with me. So they knew everything that I was going to ask, and they had prepared little speeches for the most part about what it was that they wanted to share with me. So it is really difficult in those situations to understand what a person's going to be like in an actual setting. So it's incredibly hard once people are over scripted to kind of get them off script. And we found that a much better way to find out what someone would be like in a team-based setting, which is so much of a hallmark of the Wharton experience, that it would be important to allow individuals to really interact in somewhat of a scientific setting with a few observers and give them the opportunity to see what it would be like if they came up with their own answer to a question, and then to see how they were talking to one another. So what changed was that individual interviewers were no longer being used in this regard. And instead of traveling and doing sort of 15 or 20 interviews a day, the Wharton team now goes and sets up a hub, which usually is in a major metropolitan area, and we'll invite students in groups of 6 or 7 to share some ideas with them about a specific question that they're asking of the group. And then afterwards, there's a very short 10-minute one-on-one interaction so students can share a little bit more about themselves and their own background. Wharton rightfully figured that this would be an opportunity to really see what students were going to be like once they got into the classroom. Not surprisingly, much as some of the other schools ask very pointed questions on their application forms, such as, how would you manage being in the heart of New York and the heart of the business center of the world, or how are you going to take advantage of this particular international opportunity? Wharton really capitalizes on the fact that so much of what they're offering is really based on this team-based and cohort-based system. So if for those of you that have had the chance to learn about Wharton or you visited, you'll know that this is very much a hallmark of how they conduct the school, and really a part of one of the pillars upon which the school is built. So how was the team-based discussion designed? Essentially, it was designed to encourage individuals to really talk with each other. They're all solving a particular issue, and then they're putting forth ideas about how they would solve that issue. But what is interesting is the discussion is much less focused on the actual solving and more based on the interaction between the participants. So when you are, brought into that setting, for those of you that have an interview coming up, or perhaps you're thinking about applying next year, or you're thinking about applying in round 3, when you're brought into that setting, there's really a blank slate. No one theoretically knows each other. People generally go in having done some preparation beforehand. And at Fortuna, we certainly do mock sessions so that we do we give opportunities for our clients and others to come in and with a video conference to really practice their particular pitch. What is very much an unknown, though, is how everyone's going to interact with you. So what I'd like to do is sort of walk through a little bit of the team-based discussion, how that's going to go, and the kinds of things that you might think about within the context of getting into that room yourself. So I'm just going to read you this question for those of you that are familiar with it or just kind of getting ready for next year. For many students, the global perspective fostered by Wharton's international community is brought into focus through immersive learning opportunities like global modular courses, the GMCs. GMCs are full credit courses in an intensive workshop format that take place in a location relevant to the topic. For the purpose of this discussion, consider yourself part of a group of students invited to design a new GMC. As a team, agree upon a topic to explore, then plan a 4-day course in a location or locations relevant to that topic. Provide opportunities for academic and cultural immersion while keeping in mind logistical constraints and clearly articulating your course's desired outcomes. So what's interesting to note is that really these parameters have changed a little bit over time. When Wharton first started doing this session, they weren't so specific about how long the course was going to take and how many, kind of what you were trying to solve. And people came up with some pretty interesting ideas, which cost $20,000 and took a week and a half. So over time, Wharton has really been able to drill down to kind of give you more of a sense of what it is they're looking for. And what I'd like to do is sort of share with you a little bit about creating that initial pitch. How do you think about, well, in the universe of all the ideas I could come up with, where do I even start? So I generally say you want to come up with a pitch that is resonant with you. Is there something, some experience that you've had that you feel is going to fuel your getting involved in this conversation? So I'm going to give you an example. I spent my junior year in Argentina. I'm really interested in wine, and I want to do a 4-day immersion to learn about how the wine industry has grown when compared to Europe. Or I spent a week as a high school student in Ghana, and I'm really interested in issues of access to capital. I want to suggest a program where we do this, this, and this. So I can't stress this enough. You want to have a really strong connection to what it is you're pitching. I have done enough of these mock sessions over the past few years to see that when you don't have that connection, it is really hard to be convincing. So it may or may not be related to what you want to do and what you pitch to Wharton as your value proposition and how you see yourself taking advantage of the school. But it should be something that really matters to you, because you're going to spend about a half an hour talking about it, and you want to be able to bring your teammates along. You only have a minute for this initial pitch. This whole session is only 35 minutes to begin with. So in that minute, you're going to go with, hi, my name is Mark. I'm really interested in wine in Argentina. Let me tell you why, and let me tell you why I think this is important. So I want to really make that clear. I'm not going to give you rules, but I'm going to suggest you want to have a very close connection to your topic. You also want to have done enough preparation so that if your idea is selected, you're going to have enough information to kind of go on. So you're going to have an additional layer on top of that pitch. So let's just say the Argentina example, which I guess is in my mind right now. You're going to want to have 2 or 3 locations that you'd like to visit. You're going to want to have 2 or 3 groups that you would want to introduce as partners on the program. Are you going to meet, for example, with students that are studying, agriculture and viniculture in Argentina? Are you going to look at a large producer? Are you going to look at a small producer? Are you going to talk with government groups? And there is a huge possibility that your teammates are going to go to you for okay, so we're going to choose your idea, and now what? And you want to be able to be very confident and calm that you have a bunch of ideas ready to back up. Okay, go. You've got 4 days, and this is what I want to do. I also want to suggest that you really are thoughtful about the ways that this discussion takes place. What I'm suggesting is that the team may decide that Argentina is a great idea, but they may decide that maybe they don't want to do wine. Maybe they want to do something else, or they don't really think that working, in that particular region of the world makes sense, but they kind of like your idea of working with government and small farmers. So what I generally say is be prepared to have a lot of your components cannibalized, or I guess in the anniversary of Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, which is kind of interesting to think about. So it may be that your whole pitch doesn't get taken, but there are pieces that are then used for some of the other experiences that people are talking about. And please do not feel married to your particular pitch. It is much easier to rapidly go around the room. Everybody pitches. That kind of brings you to 10 minutes in. And then you almost really have to go and take a vote at that point and see where you're heading. And I can't emphasize this enough. Digging in your heels and defending your proposition is going to waste time. And it's almost good, if you're trying to make your mark in this discussion, to really move on, to say, okay, I understand that we're not going to go with mine. Here are some things that I think we can use, and let's go look at another location, or let's go look at another way to present this. Really, everyone is there's pretty much good people in the room. No one's looking to make you look bad. Everybody just wants to look as good as possible themselves. And that means that they're usually very collaborative. They're very encouraging. And you can, say, hey, Genevieve, great idea. Let's look at how we can take, that idea about that particular government group and maybe use it for your concerns about technology in Russia. Or, hey, let's think about how we can use the student group in another setting. So I want to suggest that you are very comfortable with coming up with an idea, but sort of letting it out into the world and then watching it be used and really, kind of taken. And it's a big compliment to you if someone's going to, take part of your idea, and that can go a long, long way. Again, it is not about whether or not your idea is chosen. I can't emphasize that enough. Admissions directors are not keeping track of, well, that idea was chosen, so that's an admit. It really doesn't work like that. It's very much how you guys are going to be interacting together. Something that I want to point out to you is something that I notice students again and again will not take advantage of. Two things: incredibly strong alumni association at Wharton and incredibly strong faculty. So don't just think that you're going with 20 of your teammates to look at this issue, but that you need to use the resources available to you. Are you going to have a faculty advisor? Are you going to get some academic links in the country that you may be going to? Are you going to be connecting with local alumni groups? Don't be afraid to really use that extensive Wharton network to help you get these ideas going. And that's something that I really want to stress to you, that I've noticed from doing many of these, that sometimes students feel that, or they forget, hey, I've got all these resources, and not just of the Wharton School, but of the entire University of Pennsylvania, which as you may or may not know, has 10,000 undergrads and 10,000 graduate students, and it's a whole community of 40,000. So it's a great way to really take all of this opportunity that surrounds you and use it within the context of planning your own event. I'd like to talk a little bit about the roles that people may assume during the course of this discussion. Sometimes people feel that they really want to have a set role. So here's a set role for you. You could be the note taker. And you don't forget that you really want to be a participant. Sometimes, if you all have been in meetings, and I was just in a meeting last night where I realized I was taking a lot of notes, but then I also had to remind myself to actually participate in the conversation. So you want to verbally communicate as much as you're writing things down. So if you're the person on the whiteboard, for example, that's jotting things down, make sure that you turn your back to the board whenever possible, that you're facing the team, and that you're really part of the conversation, and you're making suggestions as well as writing down everything that's being suggested. Also, taking the opportunity, as I just said, to say, hey, Genevieve, great idea. Or I think that Mark and Sam are kind of thinking about this. What about ... So it's a really good way, in addition to kind of advocating for your own idea, you very, very much, as I mentioned, after you've made the pitch and you've kind of gone through it, you want to kind of give props and congratulations to other people that are involved in the conversation. That is definitely something that the Wharton observers are going to be looking for. They want to see how fluidly the team is working together and how much you're able to really interact with the other individuals in the room. So imagine if it's like a I guess, a circle, and there's a ball being passed around in the circle. I was thinking of an Olympics analogy, but it's the Winter Olympics. And so there's not many good analogies out there for this, but you really want to be able to collaborate and to make sure that those ideas are being bounced around as much as possible, so that ultimately everyone is being called out for something in particular. Hey, good idea. What about this? I noticed that, dot, dot, dot. I also want to stress that you don't have to be the leader. You don't have to be the driver. You don't have to be the person that's saying, okay, we're 15 minutes in. Let's figure out where we are. It's fine to have that role, but it's also terrific to be an active member of the conversation. So one thing I recommend is jotting down the names of everyone else and that's in the room and their table position so you can refer to it. But you really need to be in the conversation, and it's going to go fast. It is like 35 minutes that's going to go by like it's a second. But by deeply listening and kind of not necessarily thinking about the next thing you're going to say, but reacting and listening and reacting to what's being said to you and to the group can be really, really important and a great way to sort of showcase your listening skills as well. So I want to suggest as well that you take the time to really work on your pitch. And I know I'm going back now a little bit to the conversation that I had a couple of minutes ago about developing that pitch. You want to watch your words. You want to choose them carefully. It is incredibly difficult, and I am guilty of it on this one as well, about word fill, about saying or ah, or not making declarative sentences and sort of ending every sentence with a question, which, in the industry we refer to as up talking. So to be able to sort of feel really comfortable and confident about what you're pitching, and then as well about how you're responding to other people. I know this is an incredibly difficult thing to watch yourself on, but it can be important. So to sort of cut back on the filler, the ums and the ahs, and questions that are, statements that end up like questions. If you could just, give yourself an opportunity in front of the mirror, in front of your friends, just kind of run through it a couple of times. I think that you're going to find that that can be really, really helpful. And the reason that I know this is because when we do our mock sessions with our clients and others, we videotape everything. And so afterwards we get to look at it and say, wow, you really had a lot of filler. Let's sort of see if we can cut down on that a little bit. At the end of the day, the Wharton observers are going to be completely interested in the ways that you all are talking as a team. And again, there's no winner or loser. There's nobody that comes out as being, wow, that girl absolutely must be admitted because of this, this, and this. And then there's no one that comes out of that as really, quote, a loser. I would say that one thing you really want to make sure, though, is that you are engaged, participatory, that you let your voice be heard. Sometimes we will do a couple of these sessions and I have notes, that somebody will pitch and then not say anything for the rest of the session. And that's the kind of thing that gets noticed. But I definitely believe that these kinds of interactions are a much clearer message, as much as you can, and in a controlled environment, of how it is that you're going to work collaboratively and collectively as a student at Wharton. I wanted to also talk for a minute about the 10-minute interview that happens afterwards, which is kind of funny because we get a lot of different feedback on this. There seems to be very little rhyme or reason. You may be asked, how do you think you did? How do you think this compares to the way you usually participate in meetings? Who do you think was the strongest participant in this session and why? On occasion I have heard, but I don't know if it's a myth, who do you think didn't do so well? And I think that it's fine to sort of, pull out somebody else and say, hey, she did a great job. She was really passionate. She talked about what she cared about. But then 5 minutes in, she realized that it wasn't going to be her idea. And she was happy to sort of see the other ways that could play out as well. So just some things to kind of think about, giving a shout out to somebody else is always a nice idea. If you feel like you didn't do such a great job, or there are things that you would have liked to have said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, look, I generally take more of a leadership role. In this particular situation, I felt like there were a lot of leaders in the room, and so I was better off really being an engaged participant. But I didn't want to, kind of fight over who was sort of, managing the whole collective group. You may also decide to talk about, well, I heard some other ideas today that were really interesting, and I really believe in my pitch, but now I can see there are other ways that I could have approached it, or, I really should have brought in the alumni. Again, nothing wrong. Business schools love it when you realize something like, oh yeah, I could have done that differently, because that's what they're all about. They don't want you to come in perfect. They really want you to be able to learn from whatever experience that you're having while you're engaged with the school. And that involves the interview process as well. They may ask you, why are you interested in Wharton? They may ask you, why do you think that you'd like to get an MBA? Kind of the standard issue questions. But the truth is 10 minutes goes super fast. And you may have maybe, let's say, 3 minutes or 4 minutes on how do you think you did and who did the best. And, literally 2 other questions pertaining to your interest in going to Wharton. And that is definitely something that at this stage of the game, for those of you that have your interviews coming up next week, you really should be able to do that pretty fluently and fluidly. I would also suggest, not surprisingly, and if you haven't done this yet, you want to get on that today, making sure that you have a question to ask your interviewer. So I understand that you've been on the team here at Wharton for 5 or 6 years. What do you think has changed about the culture? Or what do you love about the student population? If it's a student interviewer, because Wharton does actually have second-year students that are involved in this, what's something that you wish you had known about the school that you didn't know at the beginning and you know now? Or, I hear that it's really it's really hardcore in the beginning when you first get there with regards to recruiting. Did you feel like you very much needed to know exactly what you wanted to do on September 1st? So depending on who your audience is, don't ask yes or no questions, but I would try to ask a question that gets them to talk a little bit about their experience, because not surprisingly, people love to talk about themselves and what they know. I mean, look at me, I'm 25 minutes into this, and I could probably go for a whole nother hour talking about this topic because I care so much about it. And I do think that it's always wise whenever you're interviewing in any situation, for those of you that have interviews at other schools coming up, to really make sure that you do have that kind of back pocket question that you can pull out and use it, so that it does make that conversation feel a little bit more conversational and a little less, kind of yes, no, and this is why I want to go to Wharton, and almost like a little bit scripted and overly rehearsed. What happens after this is that the discussion is written up by the observer or observers, and then that's shared with and matched up with your application file itself. And as you may or may not know, it is very unusual for the observer to know that much about you before you go into the room. They're going to have your resume, but they're not going to have a lot else, as opposed to some of the other peer institutions in the M7 that actually interview based on what they already know and having read your file. So I want to sort of make that clear that you're a little bit of an unknown. Always good to get there a little early, scope out the situation. Business formal is fine. If you're good with business casual, no tie, totally not a problem. Bring a bottle of water with you. I can guarantee that you're going to need it. And just kind of having it with you can be a great thing to just sort of rely on. You're going to have jitters the first couple of minutes until everybody settles in. And I really recommend, bringing a small bottle of water with you. You can bring a portfolio. You're allowed to bring in a notepad. I want to caution you about using it too much, so that as you're taking notes for yourself, in addition, I did recommend that you write down names and where everybody's sitting around the table, but you probably don't want to spend too much time, scribbling in your notebook and not fully engaging in the conversation as you go through it. And certainly afterwards, you want to make sure you get the name of the person that interviewed you or was the observer in the room. Send them a nice thank you note. Personally, and everybody laughs when I say this, I'm a big fan of handwritten. It's not necessary. You can certainly send an email, but you want it to be thoughtful and well-crafted, the way everything else is that you've communicated with the schools to date, telling them about, what you learned from the experience, how you felt. You can use your own words on this, but it was so indicative of the Wharton experience, and what how it kind of gave you an additional insight into the culture. I sometimes get asked a question, and I'm ready to take other questions as well. how does Wharton kind of decide who's going to be in what interview slot? So some of it is based on location, and then some of it obviously is driven by, your availability, et cetera. So I wouldn't be super concerned that everyone in an international location is going to be specifically of that nationality. People travel a great deal. Sometimes you have to do the group session in a country that you live next to, but you're traveling for business. So you should feel like you may or may not have people from similar backgrounds, and you probably won't have a room full of people from the same industry. You may or may not be the only man or the only woman, depending on location. But again, all of this is pretty ancillary to the actual discussion that's going to take place. And it's exciting. It is really, you should feel so wonderful. This is such a terrific signal to you that Wharton certainly wants to learn more about you. And it should be, if you can, an opportunity to kind of relax, get to know some of the other folks that might be in the program with you. And if you do have the opportunity to practice, as crazy as that sounds, try and get some friends to do a mock session with you. As I mentioned, Fortuna, we have one tonight. I'm doing one on Sunday morning. If you're interested, you can find us on the website and learn more about how to participate. But you want to make sure, again, that pitch that you develop has enough layers so that if you're called upon as the expert, let's say it gets chosen, you can go in and say, oh yeah, this location, this is the group I want to work with, this is how I see it happening. And then also enough different components so that, to go back to that word, Frankensteinization or cannibalizing, the parts of your ideas can then again be used by other pitches as well. So I recognize that it is a little bit of a niche discussion. I'm more than happy to take questions for those of you that have them. And if not, I am really glad that I had the opportunity to speak with everybody today. And again, really appreciate partnering with GMAT Club. They've just been wonderful and so welcoming to us. And we really enjoy the opportunity to share what we know at Fortuna Admissions with the applicant pool. So I just got a question about how would you handle different personalities in the team-based discussion. And the truth is, most people are going to come in, they're going to be pretty polite. You may get a couple of folks that are aggressive. I find pretty quickly that those folks get iced out. They get shut down pretty fast. The best thing you can do for someone's not saying anything is to say, hey, Susan, I loved your pitch. Do you have any other ideas on it? Or I think that, you mentioned something earlier in the way that you wanted to use the alumni group. What do you think about this? Like really trying to bring in, so I'm talking about two different personalities here. One would be someone that's super aggressive, and the other is someone that's not talking all that much. So, just, it's hard to maintain your composure, but, it is usually the aggressive person is going to get isolated pretty quick. Somebody asked me, I did a TBD last year and I got rejected. How much do you think the TBD had a role in that? Without knowing that much about you, I would say that, it certainly is a way for the admissions office to sort of learn more about you. I'm not sure, again, on the specifics about what actually happened in your room. I don't know if they were, wanted other things from you with regards to your GMAT, or they wanted other things from you on your undergrad transcript or your recommenders. Sometimes people are invited because they're really superstar candidates, and sometimes students are invited to participate because they're borderline. So it may have been that ultimately, if they were looking at a whole bunch of people that were borderline, and that you were fine in the interview, but that they felt ultimately like there were other people in the community that they wanted to bring in. It's a really difficult question to answer, not having seen the other parts of your application. But what I would say is that it's a part of the application process, clearly, but that there's so much other data that they have that ultimately, when they're going through, let's say they have 100 people, I'm making this up, and they love 25 of them, and they know that they're not going to look at 50 of them, but that still leaves 25 that they're kind of considering. So let's just say it sounds like you maybe fell into that pool, and then Wharton sort of needed to go through and figure out, well, okay, we've done all of this. We've done all the details. Like, where's this candidate going to fall out in that pool that we were maybe on the fence about. I don't know if you've been invited again this year, but if you have been, that's terrific. But I would feel positive going into it, and not necessarily that it's a make or break for you. Happy to take other questions that come up. And I am, again, so glad to have the opportunity to talk with everybody today. My name is Judith Silverman Hodara from Fortuna Admissions, where I'm a founder and director. And if you have specific questions about the Wharton TBD, or you would like to join one of our mock sessions, please let me know. You can get my contact information from our website. And I have one last question. There is no difference about where you do your TBD. So if it works for you in San Francisco or it works for you in Philadelphia, that's totally fine. Understanding that people need to make it fit with their travel and their work and where they're located. So I can tell you that typically the Wharton San Francisco, because it is actually part of the Wharton program, that's usually run by individuals from that office, as well as a couple of people from Philadelphia that fly out for it. So it's very much it's the same thing as if you had been in Philadelphia. So just to keep in mind, the only difference is you may have more people from tech and sort of more Silicon Valley folks than you would if you were in Philadelphia, where you may get more people that are interested, that are from banking and consulting. That's just sort of my 2 cents on location. Again, thank you so much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again soon. And thanks again to the GMAT Club. Have a good rest of your day.